I am going to be actually going live right now, just for a few minutes.
Here's Lester Holt. Good day, everyone. We're back on the air because a verdict in the murder and manslaughter trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin has been reached. It will be read very shortly now. He's charged with killing George Floyd last May. The jury took around a little over 10 hours of deliberation before reaching their decision. This, as you know, has been one of the most highly anticipated trials in years. The officer's knee on George Floyd's neck ignited a global protest over police use of force. Communities across the country are on edge, preparing for possible unrest following the verdict. Even the White House developing a plan of action to protect public safety. Court will return in just a minute. We were told the verdict would be read sometime between 4:30 and 5 Eastern time. So we're about to cross into that window. Let's bring in Gabe Gutierrez right now. Our correspondent has been covering this trial from the very beginning. Actually, we'll get to Gabe in a moment. We'll go to Danny Savalas right now, defense attorney and NBC News legal analyst, to give his perspective right now. Danny, if you're sitting with the defendant, your client right now, facing these kinds of charges, and the jury is back after 10 hours of deliberations, what are you telling him?
This is the worst. I mean, a lot of times...
So, around 1:30 my time here on the West Coast, they will be telling us the verdict of the George Floyd case. The United States are actually preparing for possible unrest after this verdict has come out. Once again, they were supposed to be doing it, calling the verdict at 1:30 West Coast time. I don't know what to think. This has been a highly anticipated case throughout the United States. I mean, forever that I can recall. This is crazy. It all comes down to this. Let's just wait, see what happens.
A missed opportunity on either side's presentation.
The prosecution really followed Prosecution 101. They called in a lot of experts on each issue. In a way, it was what defense attorneys sometimes call in our jaded way prosecutorial overkill. But I don't blame them at all, because they have the burden. They have the burden for each and every element beyond a reasonable doubt. So on the prosecution, I'll bring in as many experts as I can to cover each and every element as completely as I can.
I'm just trying to see if this is live on YouTube. It is.
They brought in the eyewitnesses. This was a very good job the prosecution did, bringing in eyewitnesses. And you might ask, well, why do you need eyewitnesses to a video that we can all see? Well, the prosecution very cleverly brought them in to make this much more emotional than it already was by those witnesses telling the jury about their reaction, what they thought. And you couldn't have gotten any better witnesses for the prosecution. You had a firefighter, you had an MMA fighter who could opine almost like an expert himself. On the defense side, I mean, they stuck to the battle plan. They really attacked the two main pillars. The main thing they knew they would attack, number one, causation. And that was that Derek Chauvin's knee in the back of the neck may have been mean. It may have been not very nice, not very polite, but it was not the cause of George Floyd's death. But causation being so tricky, that really delved into a lot of science and a lot of complicated things that jurors and lawyers alike were dealing with probably for the first time. And then, of course, they attacked the use of force, and they brought their own expert, the defense did, and they argued that, look, not only was this force not a felony, it was something that was accepted and taught. So it could not be an aggravated assault. It could not be something that was imminently dangerous, because it was acceptable. And the defense would and did argue that all of the force, right up until they pulled George Floyd out and put him on the ground in the prone position, up until that moment, the use of force was warranted. And then they had to fight whether or not the knee in the neck was the causative factor, the substantial causative factor in George Floyd's death. And we're going to find out in a minute if they got it right.
Danny, we'll invite you to stay with us. We may be in for
So, what they're talking about here, I don't know if you can hear it. They were talking about, like, the initial cause. They think what the initial cause was, Officer Chauvin's knee was on George Floyd's neck for about 9 minutes, and that's what caused his death. That's what the defense is saying. That's what the defense is not saying. His defense attorney is saying that his cause of death was unrelated due to the fact that his knee was on his neck for a certain amount of time. This is crazy. I feel like yes, the initial cause, I'm not gonna say it because I just don't want to have hate on my channel. So, I have my opinion, you guys have yours. I won't, it is 1:30. Trial will probably begin 82nd now, on NBC News. That's the channel that I will be watching it on. You guys can actually watch it live with me.
Callous to him, picking out the rocks from the tire as he had his knee on his back. And, honestly, a missed opportunity for the defense was that Derek Chauvin really never showed any emotion during this trial. I mean, he was masked for most of it, but we never saw anything that looked like regret from him. And I think the jurors probably saw him just sort of staring with a kind of flat affect throughout much of this trial. And maybe, again, that would have had some kind of reflection or inflection point for them as well. But I think there are some missed opportunities here, but I also think this was a very sort of singular case.
And we'll be able to put it in greater perspective in the coming minutes as we await that jury to return to the Minneapolis courtroom and deliver their verdict. In the meantime, let's go to NBC's Gabe Gutierrez. He's been following this trial since the beginning last month. We talked to
You can see all that unrest. People are already outside of the courtroom.
Describe the scene and what's about to happen there, Gabe.
Yeah, Lester, this crowd is growing by the second. You can see several people, several dozen people, perhaps several hundred now, but, Black Lives Matter. And this is similar to the crowd that we've been seeing the last couple of days. Peaceful protesters that were supporting George Floyd's family, but Lester, I want to set the scene a little bit here. Because look, this is the Hennepin County Government Center. This is the courthouse where this has all been happening. In the distance, you can see up there a military presence. Several members of the National Guard here, very tight security. This entire area has been fenced off since before this trial started. But Lester, we've been speaking with many of these protesters, and they say that, again, this has been a very difficult trial for them to watch, a very emotional trial for them to watch, a trial that has given them a lot of anxiety as they awaited this verdict. And just within the past few minutes of the announcement of the verdict being read, we saw this crowd gather here. There's a lot of media here as well, really from around the world, but also some folks that we did talk with from around the Midwest that came here to view this trial and to see what the verdict would be. So again, Lester, as we await the verdict, and it could come, any minute now, this crowd has gathered here. It's now numbering several hundred. They have signs with Black Lives Matter. You have somebody on loudspeaker right now saying no justice, no peace. Again, this case really has come to be seen as putting the American policing system on trial. Although inside that courthouse, the prosecution and the defense both say that this is about the actions of one police officer, the actions of Derek Chauvin. But these folks here see this as much more than that. They see this as one of the most important trials in recent memory. And again, they're gathering right here as we await this verdict. Lester?
Gabe, as we've been talking about, there are 3 charges: second-degree manslaughter, third-degry murder, second-degree unintentional murder. Do you get a sense from activists, from the crowds, what they would consider, I hate to use the term win, but that's all that comes to mind at this particular moment, or how the family views it?
Here you have lost communication with you, but I can describe the scene right here. You see people holding their fists in the air. Again, this is a scene we've seen play out over and over again throughout this, ever since George Floyd was killed last May. A very emotional time for the folks here. I'm going to send it back to you, Lester.
All right, Gabe, we'll get those communications issues worked out with you. Thank you. I want to go to Kristen Welker right now at the White House. The White House has made some planning for a reaction to this verdict, and the president himself has, in recent hours, commented on this case. Kristen, what can you tell us from there?
Well, Lester, let me set the scene for you at the White House right now. President Biden was about to start talking about his American Jobs Plan when it was announced that there is, in fact, a verdict. So those remarks have now been delayed as the president and this administration monitors these developments. As one White House official told me, they are watching and waiting along with the rest of the world. As you point out, President Biden and his top officials have been preparing for him to make some type of statement, remarks, reaction once there is a verdict. But earlier today, during an event, he was speaking and was asked about the trial, and he said that he prays that the jury reaches the right verdict. Now, those comments came under an immense amount of scrutiny. We asked the press secretary about it repeatedly. Was it appropriate for President Biden to weigh in on the verdict in that way before, in fact, the jury had come out and spoken? She denied that he was trying to put his finger on the scale. Instead, she noted that he had spoken to the family of George Floyd, that this was clearly an emotional time for them, for the rest of the country, and he was clearly echoing that. Now, taking a step back, Lester, we know that the administration has been in close contact with state and local officials. They are urging the public to remain calm once there is a verdict, that if there are protests, for them to be peaceful protests. And of course, that echoes what we are hearing from the family as well. We'll be watching closely to see what President Biden has to say when and if, in fact, he does speak publicly after there is a verdict. We know that the issue of criminal justice, of racial equality, has been one that he has spoken about quite extensively, and right now the administration, from a legislative perspective, has been pushing for Congress to move forward with a bill titled the George Floyd bill, which would make it easier to prosecute police misconduct. So that is the scene here behind the scenes within the Biden administration as they watch and wait for a verdict. Lester?
Kristen, thank you. We are past 4:30 Eastern, 3:30 Central, within the window now when we would expect to hear from the jury their verdict in the case of former Officer Chauvin. While we await that verdict, let me bring in Eugene Robinson. He's a Washington Post columnist and NBC News political analyst. Eugene, always good to see you. This is a moment of deep breath for everyone. We're all emotionally tied to the story because we were witnesses to it, to the extent that we saw that videotape of George Floyd dying under the knee of a police officer. As we await this verdict on 3 charges, what, in your view, should we be keeping in mind? What's our deep breath? What should it look like right now?
Well, we should try to remember that this verdict will be about the specific officer and what he specifically did that day to George Floyd. That this is a micro situation with macro implications, with implications for the whole country, and for so many of us, for so many African American men, Lester, it's personal. It feels intensely personal. Could that have been me under Derek Chauvin's knee for 9 minutes and 29 seconds? Could it have been one of my sons who found himself in that situation? And so this case, it's not just that it has taken on an outsized importance, it really does symbolize so much about this country's 400-year struggle with race and this country's, frankly, refusal to sort of acknowledge and grapple with the concept and reality of systemic racism, especially in policing. And so so many of these incidents and so many of these deaths, and frankly, we've seen so many verdicts go in favor of police officers who were acquitted. And there was a sense in this case, because it was 9 minutes and 29 seconds, and because the video went around the world, there was a sense that this is where we have to draw a line, that this has to be seen as unacceptable by everyone, regardless of race, whoever you are. You have to see this as having been unacceptable. So now the question is that the way the jury saw it? And will the jury, in essence, ratify what many of us take a different view, and what does that say to African Americans and to us personally about how we are seen in this country and how we are treated and how we are regarded. George Floyd was not treated like a citizen by Derek Chauvin. It wasn't treated like a member of the public that Derek Chauvin was sworn to protect. I think we can all agree on that. Yet that's what we're supposed to be, and that's what we have a right to be. And so just an awful lot seems to hang on what these poor 12 people decide. My sympathies are with the jury because this has got to be difficult for them, and it's certainly got the rest of us on tenterhooks just waiting to hear what they decide.
Yeah, they are sequestered, but they are certainly citizens of this country and this world, and certainly have to have some inkling, if not a lot of inkling, about the climate in this country. Eugene Robinson, thank you. Let me go back to NBC's Gabe Gutierrez. I understand our audio connection is back, and so Gabe, let me ask you about what will happen in the courtroom. The verdict will be read. What do you expect to see next?
Oh, well, Lester, it's such a highly anticipated moment. The jury will be run the courtroom, the verdict will be read. They'll go through the three charges, as you've been discussing, second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter, and a verdict will be read for each of those charges. Then, shortly after the jury is let go, we anticipate the Attorney General, Keith Ellison. He will be speaking publicly, and then sometime after that, we also expect to hear from the Floyd family. But what happens after that, of course, local authorities have been urging folks here to stay calm. As I was mentioning earlier, you can see even a growing crowd here that has been gathering here right outside the courthouse. But again, just a few moments away potentially about hearing this verdict, something that has been so long awaited here in Minneapolis. But yes, we expect the verdict to be read. There's also the consideration of whether there will be aggravating factors in this case. In other words, bumping up any potential sentence. We don't expect sentencing to happen right away, but as has been discussed, Lester, each of these charges carries up to a certain amount based on if there's several aggravating factors. In this case, we're told that the judge will decide on those aggravating factors, but with a second-degree murder, the maximum penalty being 40 years in prison, with third-degree murder maximum being 25, and then the maximum for second-degree manslaughter being 10 years. But the recommended sentencing for each of those charges, based on first-time offenders like Derek Chauvin would be, that is much shorter, 12 and a half years or so for the first two charges, second and third degree murder, and 4 years for second degree manslaughter. So there will still be those outstanding questions on exactly, what a potential sentence would be if there is a conviction. But many of these protesters, and demonstrators right now, they just want to hear what exactly this verdict will be, really, as not just the city of Minneapolis watches, Lester, but really the entire country.
Gabe Gutierrez, thank you. As we look from above, the aerial view of the park there across from the courthouse, not a lot of people, but certainly a growing crowd that we've been watching there. They, like the rest of us now, anticipating this announcement within the next several minutes is based on the window we've been given, the verdict to be announced by the jury in the Derek Chauvin case. Let me go to NBC correspondent Megan Fitzgerald. She's also in Minneapolis covering the reaction in the city. You've been talking to some of the demonstrators, Megan. What are you hearing? What do they anticipate? What do they expect?
Yeah, Lester, we were out here yesterday when shortly after those closing arguments, hundreds of people filled the streets here in Minneapolis calling for justice for George Floyd. And we talked to people asking them, what does that look like for you? And it's a couple of things here. They say that they want to see a guilty verdict for Derek Chauvin, but they also want to see changes systemically to the way that police in our country. This is a deeply personal moment, a deeply personal trial for people all across the country, and we see that, and we have been seeing that with the diverse crowds of people that have come out and protest across the nation. We talked yesterday to people who flew in from different parts of the country, saying it was important for them to be here to show support to George Floyd's family. And In fact, I had an opportunity to speak with them yesterday, asking them how they felt as we awaited the verdict. And they said that they're anxious. They're ready for this entire process to be over, but that they're very hopeful that Derek Chauvin will be found guilty. And they realize the magnitude, just the gravity of this case, telling me that this is bigger than their brother. They feel as though their brother was publicly executed, they say, a modern-day lynching, as they call it. And they say if there is not justice for George Floyd, if there's not a conviction here, that they don't feel hopeful that anybody will get justice. But they were pleased that the protests yesterday here in Minneapolis remained peaceful, and they are calling for peaceful protests moving forward, but certainly hopeful that they will get the verdict that they are hoping for, Lester.
Megan Fitzgerald down there in Minneapolis watching the crowds. Thank you. NBC News legal analyst Paul Butler is a former federal prosecutor and Georgetown School of Law professor. Paul, just give me your thoughts as we wait this verdict.
So it's a relatively short deliberation process. It's hard to read anything into that. Typically, if it's a short deliberation, the conventional wisdom is that favors the defense. With this conviction of a police officer in Minnesota, that jury also deliberated the almost exact same amount of time, looking at the exact same charges, second degree and third degree murder and second degree manslaughter.
All right, Paul, thank you very much. Let me bring in Mary Moriarty, former chief public defender for Hennepin County, Minnesota. We thank you for being with us. Can you walk us through the process of how it will play out, the mechanics of the verdict, since you're obviously familiar with those courtrooms?
I can. The jury will be brought in when the judge is ready. And when they walk in, there will be one person who will have the jury verdict in their hand, and that's the person who will be the foreperson. And as a lawyer, you're always looking at that because you wonder who the foreperson will be. The judge will ask them if they have a verdict. The foreperson will say, "We do." The judge's clerk will go get the verdict and hand it back to the judge. It can be the clerk, but it's probably going to be the judge who will actually read the verdict. And then the defense has the right to have the jury what is called polled. In other words, the judge will ask each individual juror if this is their true and correct verdict. He'll go down the line with numbers. They will all probably say yes. And then at that point, the judge has to make a decision if he's found guilty, if he's going to take Chauvin into custody because he is out on bail. On a presumptive prison case, he would be taken into custody. The state has asked for a sentence greater than the Minnesota sentencing guidelines, and so there will be Chauvin actually waived his right to have the jury make that decision about whether there are aggravating factors. He is allowing the judge to make that decision, but the judge has already said in a previous order that he will allow the lawyers to write memos on that issue to try to convince him what the appropriate sentence will be. So we won't see a sentencing today. That will probably be in a couple of weeks or however much time the judge gives the lawyers to write their memos.
All right, thank you for that perspective, Mary. Eddie Glaude is an NBC News contributor and joins us now. Eddie, we're watching the crowd build, and as I've been saying at the beginning of this, emotions have been high in this from the first time we saw that tape, so today should be no different now as we await the verdict. But what should people know? And I asked this question to Eugene a moment ago. We're at a deep breath moment now, waiting for this moment. What should we be thinking about and focusing on?
Well, unlike what the prosecutors told the jury, this trial bears the burden of the nation's central contradiction, Lester. And so there is a sense in which America is on trial here. And, whether they come back with guilty verdicts for all three counts, or if they just simply convict on second-degree manslaughter. The latter, I think, will generate discomfort, a kind of, disappointment in some ways. So I think the nation needs to be prepared for a kind of intensification of the reckoning that we've been experiencing around race, because policing in this country takes us to the heart of the contradiction. And so the trial won't resolve it, but it certainly has placed it in clear view for the nation. So we will see. My stomach is in knots at this moment because I know that we stand on the precipice here.
All right, Eddie, thank you very much. Let's go back to Gabe Gutierrez right now on the ground outside the courthouse with the crowds. Gabe?
Hey there, Lester. So we were just speaking with a demonstrator. Hi, man. How are you? We were just speaking a short time ago, and you were talking to me about how tough it has been to watch this trial. What is the significance of what's happened here in Minneapolis over the last few weeks right in this courthouse?
Well, it shows that after a year of being apart from each other that we come together for the stuff that matters. You know, this has affected every single one of us that not only lives here, but across our nation, across our world. And we came here because we need justice, and we deserve justice, and we need something to change.
You were also telling me it's been very tough to watch. Have you been able to watch this trial?
No, I haven't been able to watch any of it. It's been traumatizing, reliving it over and over and over and over again. I haven't even watched the video of him being murdered. It's too much. It's too much to normalize all of it.
What do you think what do you think is the significance of this trial moving forward, not just for Minneapolis, but for policing in America, for social justice in America?
It means that they're finally listening to us. How many times do we have to say it? How many times do we have to cry and scream and burn down buildings? Enough's enough. Like, you have to listen to us.
There's been a lot of people that have, there's been local officials have been very careful to tell people to protest peacefully. What do you make of, how Minneapolis looks like now? It's so boarded up. There's razor wire all around this city. Do you live here in Minneapolis? Are you a resident here? How tough has it been to see this community be like this for the last several weeks?
The audacity to bring people in here when you couldn't protect the Capitol? What have we been doing here? We've been asking for peace. We've been asking for justice. We've been asking for what we deserve. Like, are you kidding me? It feels like a slap in the face.
How often have you been out here? I know there was a crowd here demonstrating outside during jury deliberations. Were you out here yesterday? What do you expect to happen next after this verdict?
When George Floyd was murdered, I was out every day, and we were out. That's something that they didn't see on the news, is that we were out donating, and we were fundraising, and we were out in the streets trying to help build things back together. I haven't been able to be here since the trial started because emotionally, it's like I said, it's too much. But I know there's, and I'm not threatening when I say this, but I know there's going to be a problem if this verdict doesn't go the right way. And I'm praying that this time we get to see the justice that we're asking for.
The Floyd family has called for peace. What do you say to people who might be worried about exactly what might happen if this verdict doesn't go the right way?
We want peace too. That's what we wanted to begin with. If Chauvin would have been peaceful with the way he was policing, this wouldn't have happened. And I'm not advocating for burning everything down and, whatever the rhetoric is, but protesting is the language of the oppressed, right? So it's not on me what's going to happen next. It's on them. It's on them.
Ma'am, something I've been to many of these protests over the last year or so, ever since George Floyd died, and speaking with folks like yourself, something that I've heard over and over again, this is the first time that potentially you might feel heard. Is that kind of what this experience has signified? Do you feel heard after what's happened today, or not quite yet? Do you feel that you haven't been heard?
I will feel heard, and I think we will feel heard when they convict him. Otherwise, it's just radio silence again.
What do you think this means again? Do you think policing in America? Do you think this trial will change anything? Do you think that there needs to be more police reform? Do you think that any meaningful change will happen in your view from this verdict?
I hope so. If we're able to look at the history of what policing is in America, it was never founded to support people that look like me. So there needs to be change. There needs to be an evolution, right? So we need to stop doing the same thing and expecting different results.
Thank you, ma'am, for talking to us. We really appreciate you taking the time. So, Lester, her comments are something we've heard over and over again here. Just she said she was traumatized listening to this trial, had a very tough time listening to it. You see a frustration among many of the folks here wondering what the verdict will be. But, I wanted to share her story with you because it is something we've heard over and over again, not just over the past couple of days, but really since the death of George Floyd last May.
And Gabe, thank you for sharing that interview. It was a good interview, and we appreciate it. I want to, first of all, let you know we are at 3:54 Central Time right now, near the end of the half hour. in which we were told that we would be hearing the verdict, but as you know, things move on their own time, so we're not going anywhere. We'll continue to wait for that jury to return to the courtroom and the announcement of the verdict in the Derek Chauvin case. As we watch the crowd build in Minneapolis, let's take you all the way to the White House now. Kristen Welker is there. Kristen, they are watching all this very carefully there.
They're watching it very carefully, Lester, and I just spoke with a White House official who tells me that as we speak, preparations are underway for President Biden to speak once there is a verdict. That will likely take place sometime this evening. What specifically will the president say? Well, of course, they have to wait until there is a verdict, but this official tells me that the president will call for peace regardless of the verdict. Now, we know that in the past weeks, the president, senior administration officials have been in touch with state and local officials in Minnesota. The governor there, we anticipate that the attorney general will play an active role in making sure that any protests are peaceful. There had even been some discussion of being ready to mobilize the National Guard should that be necessary. So they have been bracing for this moment for quite some time, Lester. And again, it does come on the heels of President Biden speaking to George Floyd's family, an emotional conversation by his own description of what took place. And then those really striking comments that he made in the Oval Office earlier today, saying that he is praying that the jury reaches the right verdict. He said it's overwhelming. Now, those comments have come under a fair amount of scrutiny today, and I can tell you that in these past minutes, we've been speaking to allies inside and outside of the White House who acknowledged that they weren't the most helpful comments at this moment, in part because it's opened him up to some criticism, including from some Republicans who have said that they are concerned that that type of rhetoric could inflame a nation that is already on edge as they await this verdict. So Press Secretary Jen Psaki answered a number of questions about this earlier today during the briefing, including for myself. I asked her if it is ever appropriate for a president to weigh in on a case of such magnitude before there is a verdict. And she said the bottom line is he was not trying to weigh in on the verdict itself. Instead, he was echoing the emotions that go along with this trial. So the White House is watching and waiting to see what will happen along with the rest of the world. And Lester, I can tell you that top officials are huddled in their offices as they try to prepare to respond. Lester.
All right, Kristen Welker, so we'll monitor that front as well. I want to go to NBC's Tremaine Lee. He's been closely following the trial. He's in the Greenwood neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a traditionally black neighborhood there. Tremaine, great to have you on. You're in a place obviously steeped in African-American history. I want to run this past you. And I'm sure you've been part of these conversations. There is a sense among activists, among communities of color, that this one should be an easy call. And I'm wondering if you see a risk.
Hey guys, if you guys are just joining this live stream, we are awaiting the verdict from Minneapolis about the George Floyd's murder trial against Derek Chauvin.
They dealt with the 1921 race massacre. Then in 2016, Terrence Crutcher was shot and killed by a police officer. It was on video. There is currently a bill working its way through the state legislature that will make it illegal to film police. So this idea of a wariness to get their hopes up, even in the face of what so many people believe is evidence that is clear and just crystal clear, right? So to your point there, they don't want to get their hopes up because black folks in this country haven't really experienced true justice. And so in this case, one way or the other, as I was speaking to a lawyer activist in Ferguson on my way to Tulsa, and he said, no matter what, America is not on trial. American racism is not on trial. Police aren't even on trial. This is the trial of Derek Chauvin. Doesn't change in this country, especially the way black bodies and black communities are policed. What difference will it make? So that wariness, that anxiety, that kind of tightening of the gut that so many people are feeling.
I'm gonna go ahead and stop, not end this live stream, but just make the screen black right now. Then once we come back to the live stream, it will probably be in the courtroom. See you guys in a few minutes.